nobody considers themselves an alcoholic. The only people who consider themselves alcoholics are people who've been told they're alcoholics because they consider themselves Megan or Melissa or John. That's what they consider themselves, right? They consider themselves a father who's having a really hard time at work because his hours got cut, and so he's not making enough money, and he feels terrible because he's not supporting his family the way he really, really wants to, because he comes from a background where he didn't have the right education or he didn't get what other people around him have. He feels like he's hamstrung, and that makes him feel really shameful about who he is as a person. And he feels like his wife is looking down at him, and they haven't had sex in 4 months, and their kids are driving them crazy, and he doesn't see any of it getting better. That's what he sees himself as, not as an alcoholic.
This is the Anthropology Podcast, the podcast where we optimize the bodies, brains, and lifestyles of entrepreneurs, go-getters, and world-changing innovators.
Welcome to the Anthropology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Walker. As a naturopathic doctor and anthropologist, I optimize the health and performance of badass women working to change the world as entrepreneurs and go-getters. You know, people exactly like you. Your business, body, balance, and inner badass. These are the themes we are exploring. My interview today is so timely because September is a month dedicated to recovery. My guest today, Dr. Adi Jaffe, has had an incredible story to share. He is the author of The Abstinence Myth and the founder of the IGNTDPodcast along with his wife, and he is an expert on addiction. Dr. Jaffe talks about the pervasive shame that we have in the traditional treatment models of addiction and the problem with the black and white labels that we apply upon it. The thing about addiction and the reasons we become addicted is that they are actually pervasive to all of us. There are all times where we want to escape the feelings of our life, and it is usually that desire that triggers any form of addiction in the first place. This conversation was deep, it was insightful, and it breaks all the rules of how we traditionally talk about addiction. It is truly my pleasure to introduce you to the great work and man, Dr. Adi Jaffe. Dr. Adi Jaffe, welcome to the Anthropology Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I have so many questions for you today, and I'm trying to hold back my enthusiasm in terms of delving into them. I was watching your TED Talk, and I was looking at some of your work related to addiction and shame, and there's so many conversations that we can have this morning. But what I would really love is if you could start off by giving everyone a bit of a background with respect to your story. How did we get here today, and how is this such a passion of yours?
I'm an upper middle class child of a physician and a bank manager from Israel. Lived a really pretty good childhood, same the normal kind of stuff that happens to everybody as kids. Had friends, played around, was really just felt pretty good in the general sense of things growing up in Israel. And then my family moved when I was 14. We moved to the States, and it was an adventure for sure, but it also caused a lot of discomfort, and it started this downward spiral for me that I don't know if it would have happened when we were in Israel or not, but I hadn't been introduced to alcohol or drugs or anything like that up until that point, and that all started at that time. Within a year, by the age of 14, already I was drinking. By the age of 16, I was smoking weed every day, and by the time I went to college, I was doing both of those daily in a pretty heavy way. Started getting into more and more serious trouble, got arrested. Paid for my lawyer for my shoplifting charge with drug dealing money from my weed sales, then had a really bad breakup, and then the wheels kind of came off. I was already struggling a little bit with depression and a lot with anxiety that nobody really knew about. But during that depression episode, after a breakup, I went all in on taking whatever it is that I could take to just not feel my feelings. I felt really terrible about myself, terrible about my future. I know a lot of people can relate. That first breakup, that one where you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with this person and there's nobody else in the universe for you. I think we've all had this story, and then we repress it or we watch it in movies. But I thought my life was over, and if it was over, might as well end it with a bang. And so I used everything. I had really serious depression. Like for 3 to 6 months, sorry, I would wake up somewhere between noon and 3 p.m., start drinking and smoking weed all the way until 3 to 4 a.m., go back to sleep. I was missing tests in school. I wasn't showing up to anything, but literally like missing midterms and finals. I just couldn't care less about regular everyday life. And I was making music and it was all really, really dark. And I found harder drugs because the weed and the alcohol just were not doing enough quite. And so I found cocaine and I found hallucinogens and I found ecstasy. And eventually I found meth after I moved to California. And that was really the drug that did it for me. And I spent about 3 to 5 years heavily addicted to meth. Those last 3 years, I was probably using $400-$500 of meth a day, but I was selling it. So I had all the money in the world to do it with. And my life got smaller and smaller and more insane. And it really didn't seem like it was ever going to end. It just kept getting worse and worse. I now live in California. My family was on the East Coast. And so I was doing a really good job of isolating and not talking to them. And then the cops found me. And so the beginning of that was I'd had other arrests along the way. I'd been arrested 2 or 3 times by this point, but I had a motorcycle accident on the way to delivering some drugs. Cops found a half a pound of coke on me. That put me in a different category for them, and they started pursuing me pretty heavily. When I didn't give them what they wanted, about 3 months after that, they showed up with the SWAT team at my house, and I was facing 15 to 18 years in prison or so. They found a lot of drugs, so I had a gun and all these other things at my house. So I had about a $750,000 bail. It was like the biggest stop sign from whatever you want to believe in, that things were not going to be able to continue the way that they had up to now. And, people talk about rock bottoms. Technically, I guess that is mine. Life got pretty insane, and it kept going. I went to jail. I spent a year in jail. I did a lot to get out of that hole. And when I came back out for air and I was done with jail, I had to completely change my life, but I didn't even know what that meant at the time. So it took 2 to 3 years to find my path. In the middle of all that, I found school again, went and got a master's because I'd somehow magically graduated from undergrad in the middle of all that craziness with meth. Got my master's in psychology and found a passion. I'd never really had a passion before, and I found what I wanted to do. And that was first to figure out what the hell happened to me. And so I studied psychology and neuroscience and went in to learn about addiction. That led me to a PhD at UCLA. And as I was doing this, I found more and more things I didn't like about the way that I went through the treatment or the recovery world and what was still happening in the recovery world. And so I decided to leave academia and do groundwork with actual people who are struggling. That led to a rehab that first seeing clients in other rehabs, then a rehab that I ran, then a book, and now Ignited, which is spelled IGNTD, and that is a podcast and an online platform for helping people who struggle with mental health and addiction that is based on my way of looking at it, which is essentially a non-shaming, judgment-free way of just getting people the help that they need to become their best selves.
Well, and thank you for sharing that with such transparency. And I have so many questions out of that. But first and foremost, what is it about the traditional recovery models that, from your perspective, aren't working?
Well, honestly, I think all we have to look at is the gravity of the problem and how intractable it's been for, literally as long as we've been measuring it. So I can say 3 to 4 decades, but the only reason it's 3 to 4 decades is because we've only been really measuring how many people go get help and how well they do for about 4 decades. And it's not good. It's terrible. Something in the vicinity of 85 to 90% of people never get professional help. Now, to be fair, a lot of those people get better on their own, but most people don't want the help because the current system of help sucks. It's terrible. It's judgmental. It's labeling. It's shaming. And so people don't go get help. And then out of the 10 to 15% of people who do go get help, most of them don't succeed based on our current criteria of what it means to succeed. They don't stay abstinent for long periods of time. Their lives don't get better. They don't stop engaging in their problematic behavior. I show a chart when I give these talks in public, and the chart is that one that we've all seen about the overdose rates and how many people die from addiction. And you need one metric of how well we're doing, and that is just look at that chart. Since we started measuring drug-related accidental overdose deaths, they've been going up. And they've pretty much been doubling every decade, with this decade winning the special honor of being even worse than the previous ones. I think everything is failing in it, to be perfectly honest. The way we treat people, the way we talk to people, the approach we use with people in the rooms. But even more than that for me, and that's why I wrote my book, The Abstinence Myth, the way we look at addiction is wrong. The entire way we look at this problem is wrong. We think people are sick, and they're not sick. They're just reacting to the life that they've had and the environment that they live on. You talk about mindset a lot here. There is a body of literature that would fill the room that I'm in right now about how the way you look at your life affects your ability to succeed, affects the way other people see you, and then the way they see you as a way of mirroring your own mindset then further exacerbates the impact on your own ability to succeed. And when it comes to addiction and mental health struggles, we think addicts and people who struggle with mental health are useless, unmotivated, lazy losers who are never going to be okay and are doomed for a life of failure. And because we believe that, we create that reality for them.
Yeah, and I want to unpack, and I think we can both, from our respective experiences, speak to how addiction manifests. But as a clinician myself, I will say that addiction is definitely not constrained to the description that you just provided. I have high functioning executives who are addicted to wine every night, but might not consider themselves an alcoholic. Others who are addicted to supplementation or to TV or to junk food and I think the commonality, and you spoke to this, is that it is a reaction and an escapism to their life and their view of their life. But I'd love your perspective in terms of how you would define addiction.
Sure. And, Megan, I just got to say this. Look, nobody considers themselves an alcoholic. Right. The only people who consider themselves alcoholics are people who've been told they're alcoholics because they consider themselves Megan or Melissa or John. That's what they consider themselves, right? They consider themselves a father who's having a really hard time at work because his hours got cut, and so he's not making enough money, and he feels terrible because he's not supporting his family the way he really, really wants to. And because he comes from a background where he didn't have the right education or he didn't get what other people around him have, he feels like he's hamstrung, and that makes him feel really shameful about who he is as a person. And he feels like his wife is looking down at him, and they haven't had sex in 4 months, and their kids are driving them crazy, and he doesn't see any of it getting better. That's what he sees himself as, not as an alcoholic. We smack this ridiculous label on people as if it's some shortcut to understanding who they are, but it's just not. And they know it, but they take it on because we tell them that it's right, especially those of us who are professionals. And what I want to get back to is I want to understand for John, what's going on? Like, why did he end up here? How did that happen? Why does it feel hopeless? And what I found is when you have those conversations with people, they are not resistant. They don't end up feeling like life is hopeless. They feel like finally somebody understands them and might actually be able to show them a path to a better life. And I think, I don't know, to me, that's kind of like why we got in this space. This is why we got into this world, is to help people see a better way, not to start explaining to them why, given their endless and hopeless and chronic limitations, they just need to learn how to deal with this now limited reality. I hate that way of talking to people. I don't ever want to talk to anybody that way. Some people tell me that I'm giving people false hope, and I feel sorry for the people who say that to me, because I feel like the limitation they have in the way they see themselves and the people around them then further traps them in this notion. I was a meth addict, and people can say whatever they want about my recovery, but I drink socially now, and I'm okay with it, and it hasn't been bad. My wife and I have done MDMA in the context of our own relationship as a way to help her overcome trauma and connect more intimately. And I'm not relapsing. I'm okay. Life is fine. It's been fine for 12 years. I've been sober from meth for 17 years, but it's been, I'm not measuring my time anymore because I just live a normal life. And I have clients who have been able to experience these massive growth opportunities in their own life. But it's like we have to have a way to just alter our expectations of what is even possible. Because, what's that quote? Is it from Henry Ford? It's Henry Ford or Thomas Edison? No, Henry Ford. Whether you believe it's possible or you believe it's impossible, you're right. We do this to people in mental health all the time.
So are the labels, as it pertains to addiction, from your perspective, something that has conveniently emerged from the traditional medical model? Do they serve an element of utility?
Well, look, it's tough. We label everything. Our brain labels everything, right? I'm sitting in a chair and I'm watching you on Skype on a laptop, which is on the desk. And because we have these labels for things, they give us nice shortcuts. But like the chair I'm sitting on is actually a weirdly shaped chair. Here, I'll even show you. It's like one of those modern, weird-looking, circular, half-ball-looking things. Some people literally sit on those exercise balls, right, because it's good for you. That's a chair. Chair, the word is a shortcut for what we really mean, which is something to sit on. But the old school way of describing a chair, you'd get this picture of 4 legs and a flat surface and a back, right? Everybody could draw a chair if I just asked them. Well, that's one kind of chair. It's definitely not the chair I'm sitting in right now. So I understand we need to rely on labels, but if we started being able to just take on the understanding that the labels are very crude approximations of the thing we're talking about, then they're useful. But I think we forget it. We think that an alcoholic is a half homeless, unemployed guy who's walking around with a paper bag 40 and like urinates in public and doesn't care because they've lost all hope in the world, right? Like that's who we imagine is an alcoholic. And by the way, those people exist. But first of all, many people who struggle with alcohol look nothing like that. And even the people who do look like it are hamstrung. They're bound by these expectations. It's almost like those people you said who don't consider themselves an alcoholic, thank God. Because if they did, they'd start feeling hopeless because alcoholics are hopeless.
Right. We get this confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. There's a Pygmalion effect, an expectancy bias, right? There's all these things we find over and over in the literature, stereotype threat. And we should talk about some of these things so people have examples. I talk about them in my talks all the time.
Let's do that. Let's unpack that.
Yeah. And so just to summarize that last piece, yes, I think it's useful because we've moved out of the old model, which is before there was the word alcoholic and you were the village drunk, you were just a loser, right? Sometimes if you go far back enough, hundreds of years, the devil had you, right? It became a moral, spiritual thing. So is it okay that it moved out of the devil has you to a disease has you? Sure. Because first of all, I don't believe in the devil. Secondly, if the devil has you and like has your soul, etc., it's got this like eternity damnation pitch to it. But now people are stuck with this lifelong disease that, by the way, look, I studied behavioral neuroscience. If anybody has found the indicators of this disease, please just email me. I haven't found it. Nobody sees it. Cancer, I can find a tumor. When it comes to diabetes, I can understand genetics if it's type 1 diabetes, and I can understand insulin insensitivity if it's type 2 diabetes. And there's things for me to measure. The only thing we know with addiction is that when somebody struggles, they have a hard time not using. That's it. That's the only way that we can really measure it. And that's not a disease. I have a hard time not eating chocolate, but I don't have a chocolate disease. Like, it's just kind of ridiculous that we've gotten that dogmatic about it. So you mentioned let's break down the research, and what is one of your favorites?
Well, I'm enjoying this like really frank conversation around it because I think one of my challenges in general with respect to medicine and disease is that we are just so caught in this black and white explanation of everything. You're either for vaccines or against vaccines. You either believe in naturopathic medicine or you don't believe in it. You either have this condition or you don't. And I've just never been my experience that anything is black and white in science. And we have this human nature where we just need to compartmentalize. And so I'm actually just finding this conversation so refreshing. And I suspect for our listeners, there's just this sigh of relief around this entire concept. And one of the things I'd love to just unpack in general at a high level and as granular as you want to go, what is the myth of abstinence? Because again, it seems to be this very black and white solution to a very black and white disease or condition. And it's just never been my experience that that's how recovery works in any health context.
Yes. Let me get to the abstinence myth thing here in a minute. That binary thing is really key and important, though. You know, we used to live in a world where everything was binary, good and bad, holy and unholy, even in terms of power, right? Like if you go back to society in a really ancient way, you know, the kings sort of like who ruled and controlled everything, and the people that had no power. I mean, black and white was everywhere. And by the way, life was a little bit more black and white, right? Because death came quickly. Safety was an illusion, which it is to some extent still to this day, but in a much bigger way. And I used to teach statistics at UCLA, and I would make this joke with people that everything used to be in statistics. One of the biggest versions of a test is called the t-test. It compares two groups. It used to be the most common statistical tool. Like if you read research from 67 years ago, it's almost all t-tests. Another one is chi-square. But anyway, t-test compares two groups. And I said, you know, we don't even live in a world anymore where there are two groups to compare. And I use the example of gender. 10, 15 years ago, you would always compare men versus women. We don't even do that anymore. Because now there's trans, and there's male to female, female to male, non-binary, right? So now all of a sudden you've got like 5 different gender categories. And I think it just mirrors the experience we all have, which is, as you said, what the hell is binary? Like, what does success at work look like? When have you succeeded at work versus failed? When are you having a good day versus bad? Like, when is there a day where you wake up and everything is perfect? None of this happens. We fit the world into our categories. So you asked about the abstinence myth, and I'll explain it this way. We live in a false reality when it comes to the addiction world. And that false reality suggests that in order for somebody to get better, they have to be willing to quit. And that quitting is the way we're going to measure whether or not they got better. That's a broad an assumption that exists in the industry as, I don't know, the belief in medicine 20 years ago that we should get all bacteria out of everything, right? That we should be as sterile as possible in all environments. The assumption was just bacteria is bad, get rid of it, and you'll live a better life. In addiction, abstinence is the goal. Everybody should be attaining abstinence, and if you're in recovery and you're serious about it, you should be committed to abstinence. I think that assumption is why our industry is failing so badly. Because, first of all, nobody who's struggling with drugs and alcohol wants to quit. That's not the first thing they want to do. And the reason is simple. Their alcohol, their drugs, their porn, their food, it's making them feel better. And so you're taking somebody who's suffering on a really deep level, and what you say to them is, hey, for you to get better, I need to take your medicine. And I need to take your medicine, and you need to commit to never using your medicine again before I'll even offer you help. That's the message. And then we wonder why people don't come and get help. The example I use that translates to some people, because we're so much better in the physical space, is imagine if all physical therapy offices, they were in a building, third floor, you have to go in the elevator. But what they said is this. They said, look, we'll help you. You've got to leave your crutches, your wheelchairs, your canes at the door. You can't walk in here with crutches. It's against our policy. You have to be here with no crutches. Well, thanks, but I can't make it to your office. We put this guard at the gate, and that guard is abstinence. So that's the first thing, is we imagine that people have to commit to abstinence and understand and believe that they should have abstinence as the first step. And the second piece is then we turn around and we measure their success by their abstinence. How do you measure whether somebody's doing well in recovery? You ask them, how many days sober do you have? How long do you have? And you know what? Abstinence is not a really good measure of recovery. There are people who've been abstinent for 30 years and hate their life and hate everybody around them and are miserable in their recovery. And there are people who have cut down their use by 70, 80%, 90%, 40%, and are doing much better than they used to do. And the first example I gave of somebody who's got 30 years sober, they're heralded as like the epitome of what recovery needs to look like, regardless sometimes of what their life actually looks like. While you get people who are doing well, they're doing better, and they get told that they're failures because they haven't met the single criteria, and that criteria is abstinence.
Well, and it's so interesting you talk about that, because even this concept of this absolute notion and its link to success. I have people who won't come into our office because they're like, I haven't come to see a naturopath despite my suffering for extended periods of time because I'm so scared you're going to take away my coffee or you're going to take away my gluten. Like we've just been conditioned that to experience success in various boxes is going to require this absolvement of whatever lifestyle components we actually find enjoyment in. They say that you are the product of the 5 people with whom you spend the most time. Imagine you could spend time with hundreds of fellow entrepreneurs and go-getters looking to up-level their business, body, and mindset. The Anthropology Collective does not belong to us. It belongs to you. Come hang out with us on Facebook and let us collectively inspire, support, and cheerlead you towards your vision for contribution, your commitment towards better health, and your journey of mindset mastery. We are in this together. We are entrepreneurs by birth, by choice, and by mission. We are the Anthropology Collective. Search for us on Facebook and come join your tribe. What I'm hearing you say is that if we actually treat the root cause of the problem, which is what I'm clinically obsessed with, is we treat the root cause of the problem, why the person is unhappy, we help them manage that piece, we are reducing their need for the substance that was their compensation tool. Is that where we're going?
That's the deep level. That's the work that needs to be done. I think it just starts on an even simpler level. We just say to them, hey, what's going on in your life? Instead of, hey, you're an alcoholic and you need to, and then we give them a prescription. Because if you say that to somebody, if they say yes, then sure, they've accepted it. At least they've acquiesced, at least publicly, they tell you that they've accepted it. But I see that person who's now taken on this identity as an alcoholic, I see them as kind of having given up, right? They kind of gave up who they are for this now new definition. And people say this to me all the time. Sometimes I get real hate mail, but sometimes the arguments that people make, like somebody just made this to me on LinkedIn the other day because they read one of my pieces and they said, there's this passage in the 12 steps of how it works, right? And it says that only people who are essentially constitutionally unable to be honest fail at the 12 steps. Otherwise, it works for everybody. And then there's that phrase in AA, it works if you work it. And so he said to me, I was comparing failure at traditional treatment to like a chemotherapy patient. Let's say they go into chemotherapy, they get chemotherapy, and it just doesn't work. We would never think to turn around and say to the person, hey, you really need to not want this chemotherapy to work or it won't work. If we're going to do this again, I need you to be serious about the chemotherapy. It's insane. We would never say that to anybody. We say it to people in recovery all the time. People go through the steps. They do the work. They do what is told, and it just doesn't work. And the idea is there's something wrong with you, not with the system. And so I say, and I gave that example, and he said, well, the example you should have given is if somebody won't take their chemotherapy. And I said, it's just not true. I have found almost no resistant clients in my work, ever. People talk about addicts being resistant all the time. I've never found a resistant client. And the reason is I don't start out by telling them who they are and what they need to do. I start out by asking them what they're struggling with and what I can help with. When you get a person who's struggling and you are actually empathetic and you actually sit in front of them and you say, look, I don't know where your life is going, but I'd love to help it go where you want it to go. You know what I found? There's no client ever that is saying, look, here's what I want. I want a bunch of strippers to come to my house, and then I want like a lot of drugs and dope, and I just want to hang out and shoot up drugs until the day I die. I've never found anybody who says that. People have dreams, they have aspirations, they have things they want to complete, and they're stuck. And so let's not get them more stuck by telling them, hey, you've got this disease that you will have for the rest of your life. Let's try to figure out how to help them and get to the other side. It's not an easy route. I'm not saying the moment you do this, all of a sudden people snap to and they turn around and they quit. But people have hope and relief and some semblance of self-efficacy and the notion that, oh my God, I can do something in my life. I don't have to be a loser forever, almost immediately.
How do you get people to not externalize their emotions? Like right back to when I was hearing your story and you were saying, you know, you had all these feelings and you didn't know how to manage it. Like part of me, again, when we're going back to this root cause is I just feel like we actually have this epidemic happening in probably all cultures, but I'll call it Western culture, where we're just totally uncomfortable and have no capacity to teach people how to manage their feelings. And we placate them in a variety of different ways, like backing up to even sort of that pre-addiction phase. Like, where do we go to get people to actually have the tools to be able to manage their feelings? So we're not externalizing them. We're not jumping to pharmaceuticals to mask feeling sad.
That's a really, really great question. And so my wife and I do a lot of work with couples and relationships, and we have a podcast called Ignited. I said IGNTD again. And one of the things we preach is something called radical transparency. And radical transparency is a catchphrase. I've not heard it through other places, even though when we started talking about it, I hadn't. So I don't know if it was there before or not. It doesn't really matter. The concept is this: how do you get to a place where you can speak, I'll say relatively freely, about everything that's going on for you with as little sense of judgment, as little self-criticism, as little self-censorship as possible, so that you get to explore and you get to reveal to the people around you your truth, and through that, work through any problems you have, but also maybe more importantly for me, draw into your life a community of people who actually love you and appreciate you for who you are, and therefore allow you to grow continuously. Because I think this externalization thing that you're talking about, and I love this conversation, is partially because we started measuring our success by outside criteria constantly. Almost any measure, if you ask somebody how they know if they're doing well or not, almost any measure that they say is external. How many likes I have on Instagram, how many followers I have, how many people listen to my podcast, how many friends I have, how much money I have, what car I drive, what my title is at work. Almost all of it is external. And by the way, even in the addiction space, right? You measure it by what external stuff have you taken in. That's kind of like how we measure whether you're okay. Have you taken 0 intoxicants in? If you have, then you're good. Otherwise, you're not. And if we measure everything by external measures, then the belief is that everything outside of us will feed everything inside of us, right? But that's when it gets, again, like when it gets to me to, whether it's recovery or just general happiness, when I give these kind of more general happiness talks, yeah, there are things that we need. There are things in life that we want to be part of our lives to feel good, but they almost always pay off, or they almost always work because of the feeling, the internal impact that they have, and not at all because of what they look like from the outside. And so to be just really direct about it, like there's no amount of money in a bank that makes you happy. Now I can even say this because like I've worked with multi-billionaires who are worth more money than I will ever see in my life. More money than any human should probably have available to them, like 8, 10, $20 billion. And they wake up in the morning and they start popping pills and drinking. And when I realized that, I stopped chasing money because the money's not going to make me better. So when you ask somebody, how are you doing? And to rate their life, how many people say to you, well, you know, I'm really happy. I'm content. So I'm doing really great. Instead of naming external stimulus. So I think once we solve that problem, we start explaining to people, and that's why radical transparency to me is such a big concept. You know, you look on Instagram and everybody looks happy if you only pay attention to those people. But if you start paying attention to people who share their true life experience, some of that internal shame and the external measurement, it disappears immediately when somebody mirrors to you what real internal success and and joy and connection really feel like.
Yeah, no, I do so appreciate this conversation and this idea that it's safe and okay to have that level of transparency. And part of that's gonna be predicated on the tribe and community that you build around you. When we see these tendencies towards addiction within a family, which I think further compounds these ideas or these confirmation biases with respect to families. Do you see in your experience in your work that it is also a pattern of how a family deals with emotions, how they deal with transparency? Is that part of that patterning that you are seeing?
So there are a couple of things, right, when it comes to familial transmission of this sort of stuff. First of all, obviously there are biological components. Let's just be clear. There are things that are biological, the way your body responds to stress, the way your body responds to chemicals. Part of that is purely biological, right? Like the actual genetics. But a lot of that, and this is a realization we're having over the last 10 to 15 years, is epigenetics. It's not set in stone. So that lie, that crap that we heard 20 years ago that, hey, you're stuck with your genetics, it's actually not true. It was always false. We just didn't realize it. And there are things that you can do psychologically, environmentally, behaviorally in your life that will alter your gene expression, that will change the way your biology functions and make you more functional.
What a relief.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before, again, right, dichotomy. So before we were told black and white, these are your genes, deal with it. Just not true. So epigenetic changes can make your body more able to be resilient to stress. Well, what does that mean? Well, you better have good nutrition and take care of your physical needs well, and try not to eat McDonald's every day and stuff yourself with Coca-Cola. That'll help. Get some sleep. That's important. Mindfulness and meditation, right? Find moments to check in and reduce stress. Connection, having a connection to other people. Adaptive connections, right? The ones that are supportive. So when you talk about familial transmission, I can pretty much guarantee that the vast majority of people I work with don't have all those things in place when I start working with them. Their family did not provide a really solid, safe context for communication and connection. Actually, the opposite. They got yelled at, beaten up, raped, told they're losers and worthless. Right? So they didn't get that. There weren't a lot of opportunities to relax and get, self-care because that wasn't modeled in their life. Maybe self-care was modeled as, drinking heavily so that the husband could deal with the wife or whatever the thing is that they had. Well, if you don't have those things epigenetically, your body is under stress, and chronic stress will destroy you. It's why we have so many of these health conditions. And so to say that to somebody and say, well, look, we need to start taking care of you because your biology will shift. The way you see the world, the way your body feels in the world will shift. You came with actual biology and genetics, and then you have these epigenetics. That came from your family, and that will change. Now, as we put these things in play, your biology is changing and we'll be able to do more and more of that. But also your daily experience, anybody who's listening right now and has even put some of these things into play. I open up every one of my days with,
I love the 5-minute journal.
5-minute journal, yeah. And just a gratitude check-in and a little check-in of positive confirmation bias creation. What would make today great, right? So many of us are loaded up with negative bias creation from the moment we come to in the day. You go to your phone and you check into stress right away. A lot of those things will exacerbate the problem. And so familial transmission is important. It's just we need to understand it as the full context of what it is and not the belief that we had, which is, well, I was born to alcoholic parents, therefore I will be an alcoholic because alcoholism is in your genes. Well, not so much. Your parents learned how to behave from their parents. And my guess is if you grew up in a house where everybody was beating each other up and screaming at each other and telling each other that they're losers, your mom and dad didn't grow up in places where they were told they were loved and were hugged a lot and felt safe. So you're not only transmitting the biology, you're transmitting the behavior, and that is important.
Right. And the environment in which we engage ourselves, and we've already talked about this, does so much to determine It anchors us to how we're going to behave on a daily basis. I mean, I feel like I'm at a phase in life where all of these sayings that are on the front of the journals and the mugs, I like in the last, I don't know, year and a half, I'm like, oh, they all make sense now. Like they were all just sayings before. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And now I'm like, oh, they're like universal truths. It's like the universe is speaking to me over and over again. But this idea of tribe, like we're a manifestation of the 5 closest people to you. I was like, oh, that is like beyond true.
Yep. Our cliche is amazing in that way. You know, I have a client who, one of the things I'm working with her is I'm creating a more positive oriented bias because her language is negative. It's always been negative. She talks to herself as if she's the worst human on the face of the earth and came from a very tough upbringing around, you know, like was born out of wedlock to a situation that was already married. It was tough. It was really, really tough. And was told repeatedly that she's worthless and useless and ugly and fat and all this stuff. I didn't grow up in a situation like that. So thankfully, I'm protected because my parents told me I'm great. Now, I did a lot to screw up my life, but from an early age, the internal language was that I'm great. So I had that protecting me. She doesn't have it. So that's something we've been working on for months. And the other day, I told her, hey, just for today, I want you to take all the statements that you provide and just focus only on the positive aspect of them. So circle those and send only the positive components back to me. And she did it, and then within 2 or 3 texts already fell back into this negative focus. And I said, hey, just so you notice, you just fell back in the negative focus. She said some positive things and then immediately wrote them off. But those don't matter because I'll never be okay, and I'm fat, and I'm ugly, and all this. And I said, hey, just so you notice, you fell back on the negative. And she said, yeah, you're right. It's hard to focus on the positive when I'm in so much pain all the time. And I said, not only is that true, but you're in pain all the time because you focused on the negative. So it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle that you go through. And he said, yeah, but that doesn't mean the negative isn't true. And I said, you know what? No, it doesn't. But here's the thing. There is always positive and negative. Every day, every moment, every breath you take, there are positive and negative aspects to what's going on around you. The only question is which ones are you going to give most of your energy to? Because if you decide to exclusively focus on the negative, what happens is your attention, your cognitive effort, everything that you are putting into the world is always focused on the bad. And when everything is always focused on the bad, you start believing that everything in the world is bad. You're always in damage control, constantly, and that stresses your body. And so now your body starts reacting in ways that are even more negative, and now you're not sleeping well, and you have anxiety, and you have depression. And that becomes a self-fulfilling additional cycle as to, you see, I told you it was all bad. And we know this. We've known this from research for decades and decades and decades. Well-functioning, happy people who are doing well are not objective. They're not. They have the rose-colored glasses bias. They overestimate their probability of success. They underestimate their probability of risk. And, like it or not, they overestimate their abilities.
It's a happy place to hang out.
It is. And we can look at it and say, well, but they're wrong, right? They're not creating the right assessment. And now I think comes a question that I ask a lot of my people, especially in couples work that I do. In life, sometimes you have to make a decision, and that is, do I want to be right or do I want to be happy in this scenario?
I was just going to say that. My goal is not to be right. Like, it is so much happier to hang out in that other spot. And impactful. Yeah, like it's so much more impactful.
Like sometimes it is, right? Like if you're building a house, you want to be right about your measurements. You want to be right about the building of it, right? If I have a business, I want to be right about hiring people, because if I overhire or underhire, it'll make me also less happy. I want to be right about how much money I'm spending in my business, right? I want to be happy. I want to be right about when we put a new marketing campaign together for what we do, about making sure that I'm not spending so much money that I'm going to tank my company. So there are places where right is correct. But just to have that ability to say, okay, is this one of those places that I need to be right? Or is it one of those places that I want to be happy? I think more times than we believe, without doing the comparison, we end up in a place where I'm like, you know what? Right now I just want happy. I just want to be happy right now. And if I just want to be happy right now, then yes, there are things that could go wrong. But those are not the things I'm going to focus on, because those things will not make me happy. And I'll give one example for my own life. I just gave it in another interview yesterday, which is really funny because I don't talk about this often. But when I was talking about during my depression, and my favorite musician was Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails. My favorite band of all times, right? And it was about 6, 7, maybe 8 years ago that I had a realization. And that is, when I listen to Nine Inch Nails, the lyrics are dark, the music is dark, and it connects me back to a dark time of my life. So when I listen, I get angry, I get upset, I get resentful. And I don't want to feel angry, resentful, and upset when I'm just driving in my car on the way to work. Like, I don't want to show up to work with this angry energy. So I kind of stopped listening to one of my favorite bands of all times, because if I listen to music that makes me uplifted, I now have a playlist on Spotify and on my iTunes called Hyped, Hyped. Hyped. And when I want to be in a good mood, I put that thing on. Because even if Trent Reznor's lyrics are correct in his representation of reality, without listening to that, without allowing that information in, I end up having a happier, more content day. And when I'm driving in my car, that's what I want, right? I want joy. And so I think for a lot of people, this really simple metric of like, wait, what do I want right now? Like with my partner, with my wife, in the middle of this fight, am I looking to win this fight and be right at the end, or am I looking to have a good relationship? I think it works as a really easy, quick fix sometimes.
Yeah. And I feel like we're full circle, right? When we reach for substance or we reach for behavior, we're really just reaching for a feeling, and it's a shortcut to a feeling. And if we start to just view things through what feeling am I after right now? And is there I'm going to say a healthier way of being able to access it? Is that something that I'm open to looking at?
Totally. And that requires the radical transparency of the communication. And that requires the reduction of shame, because if you feel like you're broken, you don't want to tell other people you're broken. But if you just feel like your experience is the human experience, I can say to my wife, hey, I'm feeling really anxious recently and I'm not sleeping well. Can we talk about it? Instead of, my wife needs me to be a strong man. I can't show my wife weakness. I need to handle my lack of sleep and anxiety on my own. Hey, drinking. And by the way, I still drink. I drink socially. If I drink, I'll sleep, and then I don't have to tell my wife about the fact that I'm anxious. The only problem with that solution is I haven't solved the thing that makes me anxious. And it's going to keep going, and it's going to keep growing, and it's going to keep causing more and more struggle. So I'm going to need to drink more, because the drinking is not going to really deal with the anxiety. Our relationship is going to keep going downhill. And the next thing you know, 4 years down the line, my wife was like, you drink like a crazy person. You're an alcoholic. And I'm like, you're a bitch. We shouldn't be together anymore. You're crazy. And we end up getting divorced. Whereas all that was required was 5 years earlier for me to say to my wife, I don't feel right now. I need help.
It was interesting. I had a relationship expert on a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the criteria of successful high performance relationships. And she's like, the capacity to simply be completely honest without risk of judgment with your partner is like the most critical foundation of any healthy relationship. And I really do love it when we have experts from a variety of different fields, and we're starting to see these principles being so consistent in that messaging. And it's not about the black and white, it's not about the diagnosis, and it's really there's fundamentals. These fundamentals and these truths, they're on the front of the journal in the bookstore if you want to know what they are.
Totally, just go there.
Just walk to the bookstore. You don't even have to buy a book. Quick note from our sponsor, Badass Fuel. 2 years ago, someone asked me what supplements I take to maintain my health, my energy, and my edge. And they were surprised that I only took 4 things consistently. For myself and my patients, there are 4 basics that support at a foundational level nearly every system in our body. In my quest for the highest quality ingredients and the easiest system for consistently incorporating supplementation into my routine, I formulated and manufactured my own line of foundational supplements. My intention with this line was first and foremost quality, but equally important was a system for taking and naming the support that eased the incorporation of supplements into your life. It's trusted for myself and my patients. Under the guidance of your own healthcare provider, I'm excited to invite you to check out our foundational product line, Badass Basics. You can learn more or order the products yourself by visiting www.badassfuel.com. Before we transition, I have a section in the interview. I call them our KPIs, or key performance indicators. So just like we have them in our business, we have them in our life. But as an expert in your field, and as someone providing an alternative route to recovery and transformation, moving out of addiction, do you have a message you really want to share with people who are maybe in a state of pause for thought related to their externalization and management of pain?
Yeah, I like the way you said that. So I want to give it the weight that it deserves. Look, I have an overarching message that I think everybody needs to hear, but especially if you're struggling with addiction-like issues. There is no problem too severe that you're struggling with right now. None. I don't care what you went through as a child. I don't care how much heroin, coke, meth, pills, alcohol you're putting down right now. And I don't care how terrible your life looks in this moment. There is nothing that is too bad for you to overcome. Period. Point blank. No buts. None of that. The only thing that keeps us from starting to move up is the internal fear judgment and the actual external judgment that we're getting. And all that we're talking about here is the ability to start overriding that. And if you can find a crack in a window in your internal house that is you, to just open up and go to somebody and just say, you know what, I'm struggling, I'm in pain, I don't know what to do, I'm lost. The moment you're willing to bridge that chasm, you've started on your recovery. I
love that. And so inspiring and powerful, coming from someone who's walked the full spectrum of that experience.
I've seen, people see the story now and it seems like something that fits into a nice 5-minute summary, but it sucked for many years as I was going through it. I couldn't get hired. I was a 9-time convicted felon. My parents and the support that I had are definitely part of the reason I made it here, and part of what I try to do. So for instance, I don't know when this is coming out, but it's Recovery Month right now. And so we're actually offering, by the end of this month, we're going to give away 10 scholarships to our intro program, online recovery program. And for people who can't afford it, I think one of the first things that we need to put in place for a lot of people who are struggling, some of the people listening right now, is we have to come out and support them. Because this whole bullshit of, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps, it sounds nice. But the vast majority of people who do well have a mentor, have a role model, have somebody who holds their hand and shows them, even if it's virtual, even if it's just somebody they're looking up to and doesn't even know they're there, to guide them and show them the right way. If you don't know that there's a better way to exist, you don't even know to look for it.
Well, and I will double check our schedule of when this is coming out. I'll make sure that this is something that people have an opportunity to hear in September, in honor of that piece and absolutely the importance of this conversation. So what I'd love to do, Adi, I'd like to just switch. I've got some rapid fire questions for you so people can just get a little bit of a sense in terms of who you are. And the first one is, who is inspiring you right now?
A lot of people, but if I have to pick one, I'll pick my wife is inspiring me right now. I don't like tearing up during these things. It's a time of transition for us, for sure. Starting Ignited and starting this online world has been hard, and it's starting a business is always hard. And my wife has stepped up in ways that I just, first of all, I don't know that I would have been able to if the roles were reversed, but even maybe more importantly, in exactly the way that she had to let our family keep growing and keep functioning the way that it has. So I think that's the most inspiring person right now.
Fiction or nonfiction? What are you reading right now?
Nonfiction. I used to not be a nonfiction reader, and I started having to do it. I'm actually reading a new book by Robert Cialdini called Persuasion. I'm
Oh,
reading a
it's
few.
good.
Did you read it?
Yeah, that's great.
Really, really good. His other book, Influence, is like a standby for me and has been for more than a decade. Prefluence is pretty amazing. I'm not done with it yet. And then I'll give this thing a plug just because we're in this world and everybody thinks, so still nonfiction, sorry, but everybody hates the connection of sales and marketing and the self-help world that we're in. And it's something I had to overcome in the last 5 to 10 years because you know what? I just gave this talk in Atlanta, and even if I had the cure for cancer in this jar right now, unless people found out about it, trusted me enough, and then figured out how to get it and could afford it, I wouldn't cure anybody from cancer, even if I found the cure. And I think the same thing applies to what I do in my work. So I'm reading this book called There's a Customer Born Every Minute, which is based on, the greatest show on earth. I'm gonna pull it up so I can actually give you the right summary. It's about essentially kind of P.T. Barnum's principles of sales and marketing and how to employ those regardless of what it is you do for work. And it's definitely an interesting read.
Amazing. I'm going to explore that for a variety of reasons, which I will share with you afterwards because I can't surprise our audience yet. What is one thing you're most consistent with respect to your health?
Thing I'm most consistent with respect to my health, probably my morning ritual. And as I mentioned, that consists of, it's actually funny because I missed it today, but 5-minute journal, 20 to 30 minutes of exercise every morning. I try to not even look at my phone before those are completely done. Try to get a big jug of water before that, and I wake up half hour to an hour before my family, depending on when they wake up, so I can have a little bit of alone time.
It's perfect. The alone time is so key. What is something totally badass about you that people would not otherwise know?
I don't know. Describing myself in a badass way is something that I'm uncomfortable with. But it's funny. I think a normal person would say that I've been to jail, but I tell everybody that. So that's not true. Can I think about that for a second?
I think it's pretty badass you didn't get caught continuously going to jail. Like you broke free of that.
I did. It doesn't, it's those things you go through in life that just feel like they were inevitable, but absolutely were not, because I was on the precipice of absolute disaster when that was going on. Something badass that most people don't know about me. I'll give you one. When we moved to the States, when my family moved to the U.S., I, at 14 years old, apparently instituted a rule in our house, and that was that we are only allowed to speak Hebrew at home because I didn't want to lose the language. And to this day, I only speak Hebrew to my own kids. And my sister, who ended up moving back to Israel, she was 10 when we moved to the States. And she and we actually just had a conversation on my own podcast. She always tells me that she doesn't know why I made that decision, but it's because of that she still kept that connection to Israel and Hebrew all the time, because language is so key to the way we behave in the world. So that was something. And to this day, I don't speak Hebrew, and I won't let my kids speak English back to me.
That's really cool. Last question for you. Entrepreneurism. Are we born this way, or do we learn to become entrepreneurs?
I think we're born always thinking there's more to do and there's ways to improve things. I know that was true for me. I always looked at things and said, yeah, but you could do it this way, or it should be done that way, or something like with everything. And entrepreneurship is just the tool I try to use to actually make the world more like the way I think it should be. Because I'm not one of those entrepreneurs. There's friends that I know now who they just love the process of entrepreneurship, so they'll sell anything. I'm not that kind of entrepreneur. I see a change that needs to happen in the world, and entrepreneurship is my tool to create that change.
Well, we are also grateful that you are leveraging entrepreneurship for the message that you are putting out into the world. Dr. Adi Jaffe, thank you for being with us. And how and where do we direct people so that they can learn more about the important work that you're doing?
Thank you so much for that. We created adjaffe.com about 6 months ago exactly for that question, because everybody always asks that question and I didn't have my own website. So adjaffe.com is one place to find that. And then ignited.com, which is IGNTD.com. It's like ignited with some vowels taken out, are probably the best two places. But I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, always the same handle, and it's Dr. Adi Jaffe. So it's Dr. Adi Jaffe.
Fantastic. We'll hook everyone up in our show notes. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's been a pleasure as well.
If you enjoyed today's episode, I would so appreciate hearing from you and receiving a review. And as we mentioned in the interview today, Dr. Jaffe made a really incredible offer, and that was to be able to access some of his work through scholarship. And so we moved this interview up to make sure that we have it placed in honor of September, which is a month dedicated to awareness related to recovery. And all of the links that we referenced in today's episode can be found on my website, meganwalker.com/podcast/episode-134. Until we do